Okay, let's consider spiritual lived faith, the last of our 5 categories in this series. I often am told when I meet with a family to plan a celebration of life that the loved one who has died was not religious, but spiritual. You've heard that expression, right? What that usually means is that the person was not a churchgoer and hadn't been interested in what they thought of as organized religion, but had certainly believed that there was a spiritual dimension to the meaning of life and relationship. They might even have believed in the existence of a creator or a spiritual presence that surrounds us, but were unwilling to put a name to that presence or confine it by explanation or description. By that definition, that description, there are many people outside and inside the church who would qualify as spirituals. Janet Geer says that the theological world of the spiritual covers the widest territory of her 5 categories of faith expression. It reaches back to ancient roots and helps itself to contemporary practices. I'm going to quote her description because it provides such a clear picture for us, and you'll see some images here that maybe will hold those in your mind. She says, the physicist and the poet, the jazz musician and the psychologist, the interreligious scholar and the ornithologist, the former Benedictine and the practicing Buddhist, all potentially find their faith home here in this spiritual expression. Whether a contemplative, intellectual, adventurer, or performer, the spiritual's faith is lived in reverence, wonder, and a profound trust in the sacred nature of reality, as well as a sense of intimate connection with the creative heart of the divine life. End of quotation. Spirituals have an innate sensibility to view the world as holy ground. Every place on the planet is holy ground, every place in the cosmos. They share a profound reverence for life and being, which may be expressed through inquiry, curiosity, creativity, or silence. They are our scientists, explorers, artists, performers. You see how wide the spectrum is? Not many spirituals make it across the threshold of the church doors. When they do get inside the church building, how might we recognize them? Geer suggests that we might know them when they talk about their favorite mystic mentor, maybe Thomas Merton or Julian of Norwich. Or maybe we can tell by the way they read their Bible, not from a historical or critical perspective, but through Lectio Divina, a prayerful method designed to bring one into communion with the holy while reading the scriptures. Maybe they share their curiosity about Celtic prayer, or get lost in jazz. Do you know anybody like that? Or poetry, or a Taizé service that lifts them into a whole other realm. In congregational life, the spiritual is often aesthetically oriented. For them, the creative arts reveal and express the presence of the sacred. In fact, the arts are the spiritual's primary way to experience the reality of God. The spiritual may well be the person who says, I go to this church for the music. And sometimes the spiritual is the one who, like a couple of my children, worships in the church of nature. I sometimes, just to tease them, I say, so how was church today? And they say, oh, we worship in the church of nature. But you know what? I was in New Zealand with my daughter quite a few years ago, and we went for a hike, and we walked into a kauri grove. And these kauri trees are massive, and they're ancient, and they don't have branches till way up at the top where the canopy is. And when we walked into that space surrounded by these trees, we were overwhelmed by a sense of the sacred. We just stood there, we wept. And I'm not even a spiritual. Here's a lovely quotation attributed to Barbara Brown Taylor, my favorite ever preacher. She says, "Earth is so thick with divine possibility that it is a wonder we can walk anywhere without cracking our shins on altars." Isn't that great? Spirituals live into their faith expression by traversing the inner landscape of the self or soul. They may draw from any of many wisdom traditions in the poetry of the Sufi mystic Rumi, or Turtle Island indigenous practices, or Zen meditation, or the wisdom of the Dalai Lama, or the way of Jesus, to name a few. They might fast, chant, meditate, walk a labyrinth or a pilgrimage, or write in a journal. All of these practices serve to deepen the inner life and to progress on the path to spiritual union with God. Biblical texts that hold meaning for the spiritual include the story of Jacob wrestling with the mysterious spiritual contender through the night. I don't know if you know that story, but Jacob wrestles all night with this holy contender, and he ends up with a limp out of it and wants to know the name of this person. And it's obviously either God or an angel. And this story signifies to the spiritual the path to deeper inner connection between human and holy. The text that we listened to a few moments ago from Philippians lifts up the notion of self-emptying, exemplified in Jesus, and calling us to do likewise. Is it big enough that you can read that? Let's read it together if you can. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, assuming human likeness. When they are engaged members of the Christian faith community, spirituals offer a wide array of gifts: discipline, self-knowledge and awareness, openness, creativity, and vision. These have already been described a little bit earlier in this reflection, so let's move ahead to the shadow side for this faith expression. Again, Gear presents the shadows as threefold: self-preoccupation, you can see how that could happen, elitism, and narcissism. As with shadows in the other categories, these shadows emerge when strengths are overplayed, right? When you do too much of a good thing, it can become a shadow. Here's how Gear puts it, and I quote, "The shadow is experienced when the journey of the self becomes the journey to the self, and when the journey's destination is no longer a widening sense of belonging and union, but instead is a narrower focus on self-advancement." End of quotation. The antidote is what the church is really good at offering: community. Community. Community directs the gifts of the spiritual towards the mending of the world rather than the perfecting of the self. The shared life of the congregation refines the spiritual's pilgrimage by inviting and challenging the spirit life to be lived out, not only in all those ways we've described, but in the reality of community relationships and shared ministry out there. The choir is going to come and sing an anthem that reflects one of the many ways that the spiritual lived faith may be expressed. It's called "We Long to Know Her," and it's from our new songbook, "Then Let Us Sing." And while they're coming forward, I'm going to hand out these little papers. They have some suggested questions for you to mull over before next Sunday, because next Sunday the sermon time is going to be a free-for-all. We're going to talk a little bit about, or much if you want, talk about some of these things that we're learning about categories of faith expression, and you can give your opinion, and you can give us your doubts and your concerns or things you believe.